The Edward Snowden revelations happened over a decade ago. In that time, he has been branded as either a supervillain, a Russian dissenter, or as a hero. Such the likes of Nathan Hale, I regret I only have but one life to give to my country. That being said, Edward Snowden is in exile for the crime of illuminating the crimes the American government has committed against his own people. And in that time, there have been a lot of things he has recommended to people. And today we want to look at some of those things, talk about what is still valid, what is not, and what would make a Snowden recommended piece of software. So stay tuned to this edition of Switched to Linux. Edward Snowden was concerned about our privacy. What he observed as a contractor was that all sorts of what's called metadata was being sucked up, cataloged, stored, and databased for search. Now, this dealt with the Patriot Act, which allegedly was supposed to only be targeted towards terrorist groups or international groups mostly, but they said any local person who might have had an interaction, that's also acceptable. But this led to serious constitutional violations based on the fact that the government is not supposed to do any searches on us without a warrant and a full-fledged justifiable cause. So what he was mostly concerned about is what's called the metadata first and foremost. So there's the actual information and there's the data around it. So look, going back to the old postal mail, I know some of the audience that's younger may not relate to this, but we'll go ahead and use this first and we'll explain in other ways. So when I go to take a letter and I write a letter, I put it up inside the envelope, I seal it, and I put a stamp on it. The metadata is who is sending a letter, how big is that letter, and to where is it going. That's the metadata. So it has the basic communication data. You know, you get the letter in, there's a little stamp over the stamp. You know, the post office does one of these, which will indicate the time and the location where it was sent from. So we know the from address, we know the to address, we know who it's going to, who it's coming from, the person. We also know the date it was shipped, and we have the location it was shipped from. So even if I might have, as I travel around the country seeing different sites, I might have to drop mail in there. Well, it all has my return label on it, but my return label might be State College, but the post stamp is in Arizona. So it tells me the person generally resides in State College, but this particular piece of mail is being mailed from Arizona. That's all the metadata. None of this had anything to do with the content of the letter. Now, the content of the letter is much more private, and what a lot more people would say, hey, that's the part that really is the most important. So the metadata is okay, and that's where the government lays. The question is the metadata itself a circumstance that should be protected? And that's really what Edward Snowden had to say. The metadata is what is most important to Edward Snowden. And so software which would interfere with the metadata collection was the peak of interest to him. But also of interest to him was the ability to retain the data itself from being collected. So not only the metadata, what is on that envelope, but also the contents of that envelope are also very important to Edward Snowden. And so of the software he recommended, he generally preferred looking at software that protected the metadata, who is actually able to see that data, and the content of the data itself. And so this leads us to basic fundamental operating systems. When you're talking about a phone, your best phone system is Graphene OS, which I've installed on this Pixel device, and you can actually install it very easily, and I have a video about my experiences with Graphene. This is one that is a no-brainer system to do. This phone device will still work with banking systems and other things that you've heard, custom phones, whatever else, can't do because they're rooted and all this kind of stuff. It's all a bunch of nonsense. A Graphene OS phone is not rooted. Neither, by the way, is a Lineage phone. both of which are pretty good. Graphene is definitely better. He recommended this at one point in time. Also, he recommends Tails and Unix. Now, I have several videos of each of these operating systems. The thing about Tails, it is definitely more on the privacy end, as every person using Tails looks like every other person on the internet using Tails. And so that's very important for protecting a lot of the metadata, because in that case, it obfuscates you based on the fact that you look like everybody else. It basically produces a bunch of gray noise that you can't filter out who is who on the network. Unix is a little bit better in security, in which everything is completely isolated on a security system. You have that Tails or more of the Tor network, which he highly recommends, but you also have a lot of container isolation as well, which does a lot better job at managing the security. If one little element is compromised, the rest of the system is not generally compromised. And so Tor, Graphene, Unix, Tails, these are all still very good projects that have developed better in the last 10 years. In fact, Graphene is fairly new, but these have developed in the last 10 years and have gotten better at protecting the data, protecting not only the metadata, but the content around them. For people that say there is no anonymity on the internet, that is not true. That is simply not true. But of course, you have to use the internet a different way. If you're going onto Tails and then logging into your Google account, yeah, you're not anonymous. But if you go into Tails and you're just using it without logging into accounts, they can't figure out who is who and what is what without compromising way more system than even they have resources to do, because of the different jurisdictions and the fact everything rotates every few minutes. And so those are still very good systems that work. But next we want to talk about a couple things he has recommended that either don't work anymore or could possibly be compromised. So what are some of the services that Snowden talked about which could be compromised, might be compromised, need to be looked at, or just aren't available anymore? Well, he had recommended for email, the only email he had recommended was called LavaBit, which closed down shortly after his exile into Russia. And the reason this happened is that even with encrypted email, there's just too much metadata, and the company just chose to close itself down rather than to be put into a position to hand over data to government entities. And since any legal company has to abide by the legal requirement to hand over data, it just isn't worth it for that in that situation. Some people talk about Proton Mail, which, while it is good and has a good subset of laws, the problem with Proton Mail is it still does collect a lot of metadata. And with that metadata being collected as it does, they can still hand it over. In fact, there's been 2 high-profile cases of not violent criminals, simply activists in 2 different countries in the last week that Proton Mail has handed metadata over to help law enforcement in investigations. So even Proton Mail is not an amazing situation, even though it is technically encrypted. Now, they didn't hand over messages, they don't have access to that, but they did hand over that metadata. So other than that, Edward Snowden does not recommend email. He has recommended Signal, which is still a good protocol, but there is some cause to be concerned about it, as they have switched over from being led by a CEO who is a founder of the group to a board of directors, which is 5 board of directors. 2 of those board of directors are political activists. Now, they have done some positive political activation as well. The one of them is Whitaker stands against the snooping that UK is trying to put inside of any private messaging. The law that if it passes, Signal, WhatsApp, and several other encrypted messaging platforms have simply said they will stop offering their services in the UK. So there certainly is some positives in that front. However, the person is also has some leanings towards censorship and is all for a lot of the left-wing causes, but does not have quite as much credence towards the right wing. The other person who is the chairman of the board is Mayer. This is the same Mayer who is the person who just took over NPR, and there is definite left-wing activism in that. Now, the fundamental principle of free speech, I don't care if you're right-wing or left-wing. I don't care. I don't care who you sleep with. I don't care what you want to do with your consenting over 18 body. That's perfectly fine. I have some personal objections, but that's okay. We can agree to disagree on simple things like that. But true measure of free speech is, are you free to say the things I dislike as much as you're free to say the things I like? And that is where Mayer seems to be somewhat compromised, that she has actually called the First Amendment as a hurdle to the type of control she would like to have in the world. And so that raises some serious concerns. So the protocol itself with Signal is still good, but now we have 2 out of the 5 board members do have activist leanings, and that raises some serious questions about the long-term vitality of it. Now, the third piece of software he has recommended you'll find is SpiderOak. This is a really good application. It is very end-to-end encrypted. I believe they had even encrypted metadata at one point in time. The challenge with SpiderOak is, as of last year, they rebranded themselves and now they have no consumer front-facing accounts anymore. They are entirely large corporate. So, you know, no services unless you're a mega corporation looking for a good HIPAA compliant data storage. SpiderOak is still good in that respect, but the end user does not have that as a function any longer. So next we're going to talk about a few services that didn't exist when Snowden articles were coming out and what might make them good in this approach. So some of the newer services that have come out since the Edward Snowden revelations, or at least have gained a little bit in popularity. One that I've seen recently is one-time password, which allows, one of my clients use this, who's very privacy oriented as well. He was using this to send login information. So you put the stuff in the service, you set a passkey that only you have locally, you send the link to the person, and then you get them the passkey, and then they can decrypt it one time. And then once that's decrypted one time, it's destroyed. So they don't have a lot of the metadata. They probably, in theory, could get the IP address that created it and the IP address that saw it. But other than that, there's probably not a whole lot. I don't know if they do anything else to prevent or drop that. It's one to look at because it definitely protects the actual content, if not the metadata itself. The other one that does share, does actually protect the metadata is Onion Share. This is a sharing system through the Tor network. Of course, the Tor network is still recommended by Edward Snowden, and it is still very good, and it has developed in many positive ways over the years. And so with that, this allows you to take a file, put it up there, and share that with another person. But since both of you have to be on the Tor network to do that, this does a good job of hiding that metadata as well as the content itself. And so that really is a one of those good services. So that's the type of thing you're looking for, is things that are going to do the best they can at protecting the metadata. They're not going to have analytics embedded in them. They're at least going to have some front-facing promise to not collect IP addresses or things like that. And ways that are kind of what you want to look for is zero knowledge end-to-end encryption. That means that they don't have the ability to access the keys to get those files. So like Microsoft is end-to-end encrypted, but it is not zero knowledge. Apple is the same way. I don't believe they are anyway. I do not think Apple is zero knowledge because the problem with zero knowledge is that the big tech companies, when they get a warrant, if Apple or Microsoft or Google, if they have zero knowledge, then every single request they get for information, they say, well, we don't know. And we know that's not the case. And so these are those things to look for. You want to look for zero knowledge. You want to look for end-to-end encrypted. If you find one of those services, look to make sure it's been separately, independently audited. And if it has, it's probably a service that is going to help protect you as far as sharing data. Now, who does this apply to? More or less just journalists and things, people that have a need to share data privately. Of course, I don't advocate in any way, shape, or form breaking any forms of laws. But all that being said, the big tech has gone way too data happy collecting our data, and any pushback that we have is a good thing. So there is your thoughts about Edward Snowden and the revelations that he had come out with, and all of these other factors surrounding it, that you want to look for that data, that the services that don't collect your metadata, they give you full freedom of the system. They are generally going to be free software and open source, so free and open source software, FOSS, and they're going to have independent audits of them as well. So those are the types of things we are looking for. With that, guys, if you do like this shirt or this hat, these are available on my store at shop.switchedtolinux.com. We have a bunch of other fun stuff over there as well, but I thought I'd wear the merch today for this beautiful outdoor video. This video is recorded in Millbrook Marsh in State College, PA, and I actually have a video on my travel channel about this place. I think I do. If I do, I'll put it here. Otherwise, I'll cut that part out. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.